They say a home isn't a place, it's a feeling. But as Amy guided Spartan across the familiar fields this season, the feeling was just an echo. The land looked the same, the wind carried the same scent of pine and earth, but the heart of it all felt hollow. T's absence wasn't just a memory, it was in the empty space beside her in the saddle, the silence where his laughter should have been. As season 19 unfolds, the ranch that always grounded her now feels adrift, filled with unspoken words and the heavy weight of a life cut short. Amy's fingers tightened on the reins, the leather worn and familiar. It had been months since she'd ridden just for the sake of it, not for a client, not for a rescue, but for herself. She had told herself she was too busy, but the truth was a sharper, colder thing. She was afraid. Every trail, every creek bed, every vista from the ridge reminded her of Ty, his quiet confidence, the steady look in his eyes, the way he could gentle a horse with just a touch. The quiet of the ranch now screamed his absence. Lindy, growing quicker than a weed, was full of questions about her father. They were innocent questions from a child's heart, but they were daggers to Amy's. Did Daddy like pancakes? She'd asked just this morning. Holding up a drawing, Amy had smiled and said yes, her own throat tight. It wasn't just the big memories that hurt, it was the thousands of tiny, unshareable moments that made up a life. Inside the farmhouse, the comforting aroma of Jack's coffee and Lisa's baking filled the air, a fragile shield of normalcy. But when Amy quietly mentioned she was thinking of clearing out some of Ty's old things from the loft, a hush fell over the room. Jack looked at her, his gaze steady, and said simply, "Take your time, Amy." But she saw the worry in his eyes, the unspoken fear that she was trying to erase the past instead of healing from it. He was the rock of the family, the one who held them all together, but even Jack couldn't mend this kind of break. Later that afternoon, as Amy was grooming Spartan, she noticed one of the newer rescues, a nervous bay mare, watching her with an unusual intensity. The mare had been skittish, refusing to let anyone get close, but now it stood perfectly still, its breathing even, its eyes soft. It reminded her of the patience Ty always had. Amy approached slowly, murmuring softly. The horse didn't flinch. She rested a hand on its warm neck and whispered, "You're starting to trust me, aren't you?" And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Amy felt a flicker of the old peace return. Back in the house, searching for a misplaced photo album, she found something tucked away in the back of a closet, a sturdy wooden box she hadn't seen in years. It was Ty's old keepsake box from before they were married. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among old letters and photos, was a worn leather-bound book, his vet school journal. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but she knew she had to open it. And just like that, the past was no longer a ghost. It was a tangible thing, waiting to be understood. Amy knew deep down that this season wasn't just about finding her way forward. It was about facing what Ty had left behind. The crunch of tires on the gravel announced another arrival. It was Lou's car, sleek and out of place against the rustic backdrop of the ranch. She stepped out, dressed in a sharp business suit, her phone already pressed to her ear. But as she looked up, taking in the familiar lines of the barn and the house, with Jack waiting on the porch, the tension in her shoulders eased. Heartland had a way of stripping you down to who you really were. Lou had been back for visits, of course, but this felt different. She was alone, her smile strained. Jack enveloped her in a hug that was both welcoming and worried. Then she saw Amy approaching from the stables, and a complex mix of emotions crossed her face. So much had changed between them, so much had been left unsaid in the rush of their separate lives. They sat in the kitchen, a pot of tea between them, the silence thick with unspoken thoughts. Lou kept checking her phone, claiming it was urgent business from the mayor's office. But Amy recognized the look in her sister's eyes. It wasn't just distraction, it was deep-seated turmoil. When Amy gently pressed, Lou just shook her head. "It's complicated, Amy. Everything is complicated." Later, unpacking in her childhood bedroom, Lou discovered a forgotten relic, a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a gift Ty had given her years ago as thanks for helping him study for his final exams. She sank onto the bed, cradling the bird in her hands, and the professional mask she wore finally crumbled. Lou wasn't just stressed, she was lost, adrift in a life she had built for herself that no longer seemed to fit. Coming home wasn't a magic cure, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Peter arrived. He hadn't come for a casual visit. He came for Lou. Their conversation was held in hushed tones on the porch, but Amy caught snippets about a major investment opportunity, a project that could secure their financial future but would pull Lou even further away from the ranch. Lou looked torn, caught between the pull of ambition and the call of home. Then over breakfast, Georgie's name came up. Jack casually asked Lou if she'd heard from her. A sudden tension filled the room. Lou's response was a little too quick. She's deep in training for the Olympics. You know how focused she gets. But Amy saw the flicker of unease. It wasn't like Georgie to go completely silent, no matter how intense her training was. Is she okay, Lou? Amy pressed. Lou hesitated, then admitted. She says she is, but she sounds distant. That single worry, that hint of another family member drifting away, cast a pall over the morning. Amy realized season 19 wasn't just about the ghosts of the past, it was about the fear of losing the future. As Lou stood on the porch later, the wind whipping at her blazer, she whispered, so softly Amy almost didn't hear it. I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore. Amy stood beside her, a silent presence, two sisters looking at the same horizon from two very different places. Tim stood by the round pen, his gaze fixed on a spirited young horse that refused to yield. But the tension in his jaw wasn't just about the horse, it was about a fear he refused to name. His hand, as he reached to grip the fence, had a slight tremor he quickly hid by shoving it into his pocket. He didn't want anyone to see, especially not Jack. Of course Jack saw. He always did. Theirs was a long and complicated history, a brotherhood forged in love and fractured by tragedy. They were bound by their daughters, but peace between them was a fragile, ever-shifting thing. Later, Jack found Tim alone in the tack room, staring at a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a pamphlet from the Hudson Clinic about neurological disorders. Jack didn't pry. He just leaned against the doorframe, the scent of old leather and hay hanging in the air between them. Finally, Tim's voice, rough with emotion, broke the silence. They said it's probably nothing. A pinched nerve from an old fall. He didn't look at Jack. But what if it isn't? Jack was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, you were never good at asking for help, Tim. A flash of the old anger sparked in Tim's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Fear. I have grandkids, Jack, he said, his voice cracking. I don't want to be a liability. Jack took a slow breath. Then stop acting like you're already fading away. The tension eased, but the unspoken fear remained. Lisa, ever the peacemaker, tried to lift the spirits with a family dinner, but even amidst the chatter and laughter, an undercurrent of anxiety flowed. Jack himself was hiding something, a weathered envelope that had arrived a few days prior, with a return address he hadn't seen in 30 years. When Lisa had asked, he'd brushed it off, tucking it into an old book. But Lisa knew him too well. Tim, meanwhile, was trying to outrun his own mortality, throwing himself into the hardest physical labor on the ranch, repairing fences, hauling feed, pushing his body as if to prove the doctors wrong. Amy watched him, noticing the subtle winces of pain he tried to hide. That evening, as Jack stood alone in the barn, his eyes fell on an old rodeo photo from their youth. He and Tim, young and reckless, full of fire and ambition. He was flooded with the memory of a night that had changed everything, a brutal accident that had nearly killed Tim and left a chasm of guilt and blame between them. The scars they carried weren't just emotional, they were written in their very bones. As the camera focused on Jack's weary face and Tim's trembling hand, it was clear that the past was never truly buried at Heartland. It was just waiting for the right moment to surface. That night, Amy found Tim sitting alone on the bunkhouse steps. She offered him a cup of coffee, which he refused. She asked if he was okay, and he remained silent. Then, his voice low, he said, "You always think you have more time." Amy didn't have an answer. She just sat with him in the quiet darkness, offering the simple comfort of her presence. A storm was brewing, not in the sky but in the hearts of the Heartland family. A storm of long-buried secrets and unspoken fears. And this season, the healing of horses would have to wait. It was the people who needed mending now. The familiar rhythm of the ranch, the clang of the gate, the soft nickering of horses at dawn, was interrupted by the arrival of a dusty, unfamiliar truck. The man who stepped out was a stranger. His name was Finn. He was quiet, with eyes that seemed to hold a world of hurt, and he came with a recommendation from Caleb as a skilled but troubled hand. He rarely spoke, his focus entirely on the horses, but the way he handled them, with a gentle, intuitive touch, made Amy take notice. Jack was wary, Lisa was kind, and Tim was openly suspicious. But Amy saw something in Finn's guarded expression that she recognized, the look of a soul that had been bruised by life and was too proud to show the pain. Just as the family was adjusting to Finn's quiet presence, another disruption arrived, this one much louder. A teenager named Chloe, defiant and angry, was dropped off by a social worker. She was part of a youth outreach program, sent to Heartland as a last resort. Chloe made it clear she thought the ranch was a joke and the horses were just smelly farm animals. But Amy, seeing the pain behind the girl's defensive anger, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she gave Chloe a challenge to earn the trust of a mare that was as stubborn and mistrustful as she was. At first, Chloe scoffed. Then, after being met with a sharp snort and a flick of the mare's tail, something shifted. Chloe stared at the horse, a flicker of understanding in her eyes, and whispered, "You don't trust anyone either, do you?" In the midst of this, another vehicle pulled in, this one a horse trailer driven by a woman named Sarah. She was warm and capable, and she explained that she had worked with Ty on a few remote rescue cases years ago. Amy didn't remember Ty ever mentioning her, but Sarah spoke of him with such genuine affection, sharing stories Amy had never heard, that she soon won her over. Sarah had brought with her an older, arthritic horse she said needed Amy's special touch. But as Amy worked with the horse, she noticed Sarah watching, her expression a strange mix of hope and anxiety. Something about her story didn't quite add up. The tension on the ranch finally boiled over when Chloe and Finn had a confrontation in the barn. Chloe's sharp tongue collided with Finn's stoic silence. Amy intervened, not by taking sides, but by giving them a shared task to work together to repair a section of fence damaged in a recent storm. They grumbled and complained, but as they worked side by side, a grudging respect began to form. Amy watched them from a distance, a small smile on her face. Heartland was changing. The new arrivals acting as mirrors, reflecting the family's own unresolved issues. These newcomers weren't just visitors, they were catalysts, pushing the family to confront the things they had buried. And Amy knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was the next chapter, whether they were ready for it or not. It began with a discovery. While searching for some of Lindy's old baby clothes in the attic, Amy's hand brushed against a loose floorboard. Curiosity piqued, she pried it open. Beneath it lay a flat metal box covered in a thin layer of dust. It was Ty's. Not a journal this time, but something more raw, more immediate. Inside were a series of cassette tapes and a small handheld recorder. Tapes he had used to document his thoughts on difficult cases, his private veterinary diary. She picked up a tape labeled Wild Pine Stallion, and with trembling hands, inserted it into the old player she found in the box. The first thing she heard was Ty's voice, clear and close, as if he were in the room with her. "If you're hearing this, Lindy," he began, his voice thick with an emotion Amy had rarely heard, "it means you're old enough to understand. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to guide you, but I hope my work, these stories can show you what I believed in. That everything and everyone is worth fighting for." Amy sank to the floor, the dusty attic air thick with memory. Listened. The tapes were a revelation, a window into a part of Ty's life he had kept private. Cases he'd worked on his own, horses he'd saved on the brink, but he returned again and again to one case, the Wild Pine Stallion. Patient 113, he called him, unchipped, untraceable. "He's got a fire in him I've never seen. But there's a deep loyalty there too. He's protecting a mare, a sick one. I have to go back. I can't leave them." But the final entry on that case was abrupt, unfinished, as if he'd been called away unexpectedly. Amy felt a knot of unease. Why was this one horse so important to him? She brought the box downstairs. When Jack saw it, his face went ashen. "He asked me to hold on to that for him," he said, his voice strained. "He made me promise to wait. He said you'd know when the time was right." Amy didn't feel ready. She felt like she had been punched in the gut, but a new resolve hardened within her. That stallion was still out there. Ty had made a promise to that horse, and if he couldn't keep it, she would. Her search at the local records office turned up nothing. No official file on patient 113. It was as if the horse was a ghost. But Ty's voice on the tapes was real. His concern was real. It wasn't just a case, it was personal. The last thing he said on the final tape echoed in her mind. This horse, he's a survivor. He reminds me of me." That night, Amy sat in the quiet of the barn, the cassette player in her lap. Lindy was asleep in the house, clutching the small wooden bird Ty had carved. As the moon cast long shadows across the hay-strewn floor, Amy whispered into the darkness, "I'll finish this for you, Ty. I promise." Somewhere in the vast wilderness, a stallion waited. And somewhere on those tapes, a piece of Ty's soul was waiting to be found. Amy finally understood. This season wasn't about letting go. It was about holding on to the promises left behind. A surprise visitor and a gathering storm. The morning was deceptively calm, a light mist hanging over the fields like a veil. Jack was out early, oiling a squeaky gate hinge, when he heard a familiar voice call his name. He turned, his heart giving a lurch. Stepping out of the mist, looking older, but with the same irrepressible spirit in her eyes, was Mallory. She looked tired, her clothes dusty from travel, but her smile was as bright as ever. For a moment they just stood there, the years falling away. Then she rushed forward and threw her arms around him in a fierce hug. When Amy saw her, she froze mid-stride, a bucket of feed in her hand. Then a slow grin spread across her face, followed by a laugh that was pure relief. Their embrace was a homecoming, a return of a joy they hadn't realized was so deeply missed. But Mallory hadn't come just for a reunion. That evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, the air filled with stories and laughter, Mallory's gaze kept drifting to a photo of Ty on the mantelpiece. Later, when it was just her and Amy, she confessed, "I never got to say goodbye. He called me, a few weeks before the accident. He sounded worried. He said there was something he had to take care of, something from his past. I told him to be careful." Amy's blood ran cold. Another secret, another piece of the puzzle. She showed Mallory the box of tapes. As Mallory ran her hand over the metal case, she said softly, "Maybe this is what he was talking about." The universe seemed to agree. That night, the storm that had been threatening for days finally broke with a terrifying fury. Thunder shook the house, and a bolt of lightning struck a large tree near the barn, sending horses into a panic. In the ensuing chaos, a terrified young colt, the one Chloe had been working with, bolted from its stall and disappeared into the raging storm. Without a second thought, Amy was after it, the rain plastering her hair to her face. She found him by the swelling creek, his eyes wide with terror. And as she reached for his halter, another hand was there beside hers. Mallory soaked to the bone but resolute. Together they calmed the colt and led him, step by treacherous step, back to the safety of the barn. In that moment, looking at her friend, Amy saw not just a visitor, but a partner. The next morning, the world was washed clean. As they sat around the table, nursing mugs of hot coffee, Mallory looked at Amy. "I'm not just visiting," she said, her voice firm. "I think I was meant to be here, to help you with this,